You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton, and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. Welcome to the show, Hilliard.
Thanks for inviting me on, Jim.
Alberta's unemployment rate now the worst it's been since the early 80s. What kind of a mood is there in Edmonton right now?
I think it's, Edmonton is somewhat insulated from what's happening, but people are slowly starting to realize that this is not just a temporary dip as was anticipated early in 2015. People expected it to basically recover by the end of that year, and now we're a year later, and if anything, the slowdown is deepening. So, but Calgary is definitely the epicenter of fear and gloom and doom. It's a very. I just was talking to a friend of mine in Calgary yesterday, and he said that there was a house in one of the most prestigious parts of Calgary that had been listed a year ago for $8.8 million, and it just sold for $3.3 million. And the person that had developed it, this is a spec build in an older neighborhood, had spent $6.6 million to develop that property, probably $2 million on the land and $4 million plus on the construction. Very large, beautiful home, and I don't know what the details are of why they accepted such a low price, but presumably the lender had probably gotten involved and forced the sale. But anybody that's sitting in Vancouver with an average home of valued at $2 million or something, I would encourage them to think about looking elsewhere, because there's some real bargains in Alberta.
Of course, you have to have a job to go along with it, though.
Well, that's going to be the problem. The job situation is getting worse in Alberta, and I expect it will continue to get worse. We desperately need pipelines to get the product out of Alberta, and I think there was some recent bad news out of Montreal about the potential for the Energy East pipeline, and people are still hopeful about the Trans Mountain pipeline that would go to Burnaby, BC with oil, but there's nothing imminent in terms of getting that started. So unfortunately, Alberta's getting hit with a double whammy. There's a slowdown in the oil and gas industry, which is deep, like the 80s. And then on top of that, we're going to start seeing the incredible building boom that we've had really for 10 years now. As the projects are completed, there's no new projects, and that's causing some real difficulties with people that work in that industry. So, maybe Ontario, there's a pickup in Ontario and BC with some export industries. Some people can move. I saw somebody on the internet recently saying, maybe we could, because there are some shortages in the U.S. for some skilled workers in the construction industry. Maybe people would leap at the chance to go down to the U.S. and work there and get paid in real dollars instead of Canadian dollars. But for now, it's very difficult. I know that a lot of people are moving back to, if they came from Ontario or New Brunswick or Newfoundland, I'm sure that many of them are moving back. I don't know if you saw the report about the Fort McMurray Airport, but they just built a brand new airport in Fort McMurray for $258 million. Unfortunately, the timing was horrible, and now the flights, there's 80% of the flights are being canceled because there just isn't the traffic. They used to pay for people to commute from home to Fort McMurray, but now they're basically saying if you want to work, there are still jobs, but the companies are refusing to pay the commuting costs. So they'll just say you live here, and we got lots of space in these work camps, man camps they call them, and you can live there, but we won't pay for you to commute. So the charter flights that were being done are all being canceled. And I noticed that WestJet announced a big change. I think 5 flights a day out of Calgary and 6 flights a day out of Edmonton are being canceled. So there's some really big changes happening.
And of course, the Alberta government is going to announce its new royalty structure. Any concerns about that?
Well, it's been delayed twice now, and the last guy that tried it, I just saw this thing. It was 5 years ago. Ed Stelmach tried to bring in a new royalty regime, and he got beaten back pretty brutally, I would say, and then shortly after that left office. So it's a very difficult time. It's a difficult time. There's no good time to do it. And he was doing it when prices were relatively high, but to try and do anything right now is difficult. He did actually. Stelmach did bring in some increases in the bitumen area, but the increases and they stuck. But the increases that he made in the conventional oil and gas were reversed after a huge lobbying effort from the industry. So I suspect that with the twice delayed panel recommendations that that haven't come out yet, that there's a furious lobbying effort going on behind the scenes. And, probably the industry, crying a ton of tears, probably they've got some really, really valid arguments at this time, as it must be very difficult being in that industry. It's going to affect every industry. It's going to affect the investment industry, affect restaurants, it's going to affect everything, really.
And of course, yes, the mayor of Montreal saying he didn't want any stinking bitumen going through his city or near his city on its way to eastern refineries. Well, he's supporting the Arab people who are killing the Alberta oil industry when he says that.
Yeah, they are importing oil, and it's unfortunate because it does have the potential to create some tensions in the national fabric of Canada, because there's always been that east-west and Quebec against the rest of the world kind of thing, and Albertans remember some of that, fairly, their memories are long, and Albertans are hurting right now, so any comments like that are stoking the fires of anger, and Quebec can't really claim any kind of cleanliness because it's a shame, actually. We are still producing and selling asbestos, and everybody knows asbestos is a very harmful substance that comes out of Quebec. So nobody's clean enough to point fingers. But unfortunately, the worldwide consensus seems to be definitely against oil, and especially against bitumen. So, I don't think bitumen is any dirtier than any other source of oil. Oil is dirty, but we need it for transportation. So,
well, it's the same kind of oil that Venezuela and Mexico make.
Yeah.
I don't see any campaigns against them.
No, it's true, and somehow it's become the cause célèbre, and it's just unfortunate that Alberta volunteered to be the place that gets to be on the hot seat right at this moment. But the government, the new government in Ottawa and the new government of Alberta have some really big challenges ahead of them, because along with the difficulty with getting the bitumen to market is just a general slowdown. I'm sure that Canada's in a recession now, or if it isn't in a recession now, it will be soon. And they're going to have all kinds of issues to deal with: higher unemployment and unemployment insurance payments. And they're trying to find ways to diversify, but there's a limit to what government can do. That's the problem. I think the difficulty too is that, and we've talked about this before, I think, is that the manufacturing rebound just isn't strong enough to make up for the losses in the energy sector. A lot of the manufacturing jobs were lost over the last 20 years because Canada was a relatively high-cost jurisdiction. Southern Ontario, I think something like 500,000 jobs were lost. And just because the Canadian dollar goes down to 70 cents doesn't mean that those plants, those jobs are going to come back. It wouldn't be a question of starting up plants that were closed down. It would be a question of building new plants, because the technology has changed, obviously, and robots, and they're, the U.S., for example, is producing more manufacturing than it ever has, and it's got something like, only 10% of the workers in the manufacturing sector that it had 30 years ago. So Canada's fallen behind on the investment in the new technology, the robotic technology for manufacturing, and it's going to be a challenge to get it back. So there is going to be a lot of discussion. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, Ottawa could take any duties or tariffs off equipment that would be used to expand the manufacturing sector. I don't know if they've done that or if they plan to do that. But so often politicians don't do what to everybody else seems to be the obvious. And with their infrastructure, will they say, we'll give you a complete write-down or write-off if you start constructing that west to east pipeline?
Well, that's a good point. One of the things that's good about, there's been some pretty big tax increases in Alberta. For example, it's gone from 39, the highest tax bracket has gone from 39.5% to 48% when it's fully implemented here soon. So that's the bad news. But the good news is that when you have relatively high personal income tax rates, you can offer tax breaks if people agree to invest in things that you want to promote as the government. So if the government wants to promote infrastructure, they get a pretty big bang for their buck if they say, okay, if you invest in this particular type of infrastructure. So the question becomes agreeing on what kind of infrastructure we want. And pipelines would make, to most Albertans, I think pipelines would make really good investments right now in infrastructure. It seems like LRT is another one that everybody seems to, there's more agreement on LRT and rapid transit than there is on pipelines. But once people can agree on something, and somebody can exert some leadership, then let's get on with it. Let's get because there's no point in having people sit around and collect unemployment insurance, or EI as it's called now. We might as well get them working on something that's going to be valuable. And In the 1930s, they built a whole bunch of big projects in the United States that people are still benefiting from today. The highway system, some huge projects like dams and stuff, and those things are still operating today. So there's no point in wasting all that human potential. You might as well organize it and get it doing something, and because there's nothing worse for people's future employability that it would be to have a period of 2 or 3 years of unemployment. It just doesn't. It's not good for anybody.
Sure, and I could see if you wanted a positive employment insurance plan. How about telling somebody who's been on unemployment for quite some time, look, we're telling employers now, we'll still pay your unemployment fee or your employment insurance, but they'll pay you their regular salary on top of that. So people will have a living wage again, because they're probably not going to get the $100,000 to $200,000 a year job they had in the oil patch, but they'd have a decent income. It's supplemented by the government, but that will be taxed. And of course, the more people work and buy things, the more jobs are created. So you're helping solve the problem that way. Again, I've never heard of anybody suggesting that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
you're going to be paying them EI anyway.
I think so, and I think that's but somebody has to take the lead in that, and that it's difficult in a country like Canada where you've got provincial governments and federal governments, everybody's involved. It's hard to get leadership. That's the thing. It's like the consensus is a very difficult thing to find in the Canadian system. It's difficult in any country, I'm sure, but Canada especially seems to have trouble agreeing on. So unfortunately, I hope they find some stuff where they can employ, hundreds of thousands of people, because that's going to be what's required. And even if they run a deficit of $10 billion a year, I think the announcement was they were going to run a deficit of $10 billion over a period of years. But I would argue that they need to run a deficit even more than $10 billion every year to make up for the $50 billion hit, as the governor of the Bank of Canada put that number on it. The $50 billion hit that's hitting us from energy and mines and minerals. I mean, Vancouver, for example, BC, is not immune to the slowdown in not so much in oil and gas, but in base metals and coal and that sort of thing. There's an awful lot of people that are dependent on that sort of thing in British Columbia, and Ontario as well. So and Quebec. So there's a huge hit that's happening, and it wouldn't be a bad thing, in my opinion.
Well, I know the provincial government has been asked to give the mining industry a break. It brings in $800 million a year, almost as much as the movie industry. The movie industry, though, is sexy because you have movie stars attached to it. Coal mining or the digging up of gold or silver or copper, much less sexy. It's hard, dirty work, and it seems the government couldn't care less.
Well, yeah, I don't know. And I guess even that industry, there's technological advances. That means there's fewer people employed for the same amount of production, right? But maybe they'll end up just trying a little bit of everything.
Of course, going against the pipelines, bad publicity every time a pipeline springs a leak. And now a new audit has found that the National Energy Board isn't very good at watching over the construction of projects when they approve them. They walk away. So if there are defects or problems, they don't report it because they're not looking. So people don't trust them either.
Yeah, there's lots of challenges, but I think that I hope that people give the leaders a break in terms of the deficit, because it's going to be a deficit no matter what they do. And I would rather see them run a deficit to invest in something worthwhile than to run a deficit just that's forced on them because there's a bunch of unemployment and they end up paying out much higher EI claims. It would make way more sense to take charge of it and move ahead. And then the other thing we need to get a new image for Canada in terms of what, I know that they went to Paris in December and they said that we're going to lower our greenhouse gas emissions. Whatever it is, we need to sort of reintroduce ourselves in the world and I think we got a great chance to be considered a green country, a cleaner type country, and promote ecotourism, because we got all the space, all these wonderful frontiers, and there's lots of places in the world where people are thrilled to see, places like Banff, Whistler, and Niagara Falls, and that sort of thing. And they can't believe when they see the wide open spaces we have. Tourism from different areas. I was in Whistler recently, never been busier. It's just unbelievable with the combination of the Canadian dollar and some half decent snow. It's just booming there. So there's potential, but and like you say, the movie industry. We used to in Alberta. We used to have several movies going at any given time. I guess it was the dollar that stopped that. But apparently the X-Files are coming back. Are they going to shoot that in Vancouver?
They've already done it. It's already on
already?
TV. Yeah, they're showing it as a limited series.
Awesome.
Well, of course, the exteriors make it look like it's Washington, D.C., but the interior stuff shot inside in Vancouver, and I can tell from some of the exterior shots, too, you can't hide the mountains very easily.
Yeah, you can tell. But, I mean, the average person wouldn't know. So but that movie Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio was partially shot in Alberta. But
yes, it was. But they pretend it's the U.S.
Well, I think they went to the U.S. into New Mexico or something, too, and there was some... They did parts of it different places, but
yeah, they said the Aboriginals were Sioux and Pawnee, and I went, no, not in Alberta. They'd be Blackfeet or Slavey Beaver.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a good. It'll probably win some Academy Awards, I think.
And of course, while DiCaprio was in Alberta, he was financed by the Saudis to badmouth the oil sands.
Yeah, and Justin Trudeau apparently phoned him and argued with him and complained about his views. So I don't know if he's able to convince him, but he tried.
Well, they are saying Justin is the world's sexiest politician right now.
I think,
use it before you lose it.
Yeah, exactly. And, somebody reminded me the other day that his father was in for 19 years. So if you say that around Alberta, you get a lot of people pretty upset. I don't think they're not looking forward to the possibility that another Trudeau would be around for 19 years.
Well, perhaps if he starts a pipeline, they'll like him.
Yeah, I guess that's right. He's got the there's an opportunity there to change their minds fairly quickly. They did elect a number of, for the first time ever, they elected a few representatives, and 17 in Vancouver. So in the Vancouver area, I should say, not just in Vancouver.
Well, it was nice of the Conservative opposition to chastise the Trudeau government for not building any pipelines.
Yeah.
And Justin pointed out, well, who was in power for the last 10 years and didn't build any?
Exactly.
They had a chance. It's, like he said, and they've only had 2 days of hearings in Parliament. So pretty hard to get things changed. But I've never seen a prime minister act on promises so fast in my life. And I've been doing politics since 1975. Yeah,
I think we should all just hope that the leaders are successful in getting this thing going and doing some stuff, and because it's going to be a very challenging time.
And our former prime minister did not meet with premiers. He did not meet with the mayors of cities. And Justin was surprised that he was the first prime minister to visit Vancouver City Hall since his father.
It's a refreshing change.
He's willing to listen. I haven't heard him ever say, I reject that out of hand. And walk away from anybody. And I've seen that from previous finance ministers and prime ministers. He doesn't seem to be stuck on ideology. I think he wants to do what's best for Canada, which means that cuts across party lines. He doesn't care if it helps the Conservatives or the NDP to do a project. I think he wants to do what's best for the people. I think in his heart he feels that. And he hasn't so far succumbed to the influence of, say, big banks or big oil.
Yeah. Well, in Alberta, it's probably best if you want to praise Justin Trudeau to keep quiet. There's only a few people that are feeling that way. But, as you say, it could turn around. It could very well turn around. Well,
he has, like I said, publicly at least, it seems to be a government that's willing to accept change, willing to accept new ideas. The editorial the New York Times did about Harper was he was a man who wanted to keep Canada in the dark ages and keep us ignorant, stupid, and in the dark.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think with Trudeau, it's a different attitude. I know some of the people who were elected to office, they were pretty shocked actually at their success. But they're certainly going to Ottawa with a new attitude that it's yes, we can attitude, not a no, we can't or we won't. And that perhaps is the best thing for the future of Canada. In all, I was born in Alberta, and I think there's something in Albertan DNA that makes you a huge fan of free enterprise. Everybody in my family, it doesn't matter what their job is, they all have secondary jobs or little enterprises on the side. I think you see that in Alberta all over, where people are eternal optimists. People asked after the huge floods in Calgary, would the stampede take place? And I said, if people have to hold pieces of plywood over their heads for the horses to run, they'll do it. And they did run the stampede despite the flood. So I think when it comes to personal effort, perseverance, Albertans are probably the best in the country at that, because if you look back at the 20s and 30s, Alberta was a very hard luck province, and they pulled themselves up out of it. And if anybody can do it, they can.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. But we did go through a really tough time in Alberta in the 30s, and actually, not many people know this, Alberta was the sole jurisdiction in Canada to default on its debt. So that's not going to happen this time, obviously. But we did lose our AAA credit rating recently. But and one thing that does worry me a little bit is the Alberta Treasury branches are making loans in a sense of trying to, you want your bankers to be really hard-nosed and kind of the kind of people that like to say no if they're dealing with taxpayer money. And
on the other hand, they said one of the reasons why America is more successful, at least right now, is even their bankers are more willing to take risks on new enterprises or new technology.
Yeah, but at least they're dealing with private sector money. In the case of Alberta, and it's unique in this sense, it's actually a government-owned bank, which is very unusual. So, and they don't have a good history of being able to pick winners and losers. Right? So that's the problem. We have a long history in Alberta of people trying to encourage diversification, going back to Lougheed days or even before that, and getting into some amazing fiascos with government money promoting. I don't know what it is. It just seems to be very difficult to find the good projects and avoid the bad projects.
Well, in Alberta, Glenn Clark crashed and burned on the fast ferries, ships that cost $250 million to build, and they sold them for $17 million. Yeah,
ferries, of course, they always have government involvement, right? Because nobody in the private sector would ever be able to make a living.
Well, they're still trying to get Vancouver to Victoria passenger-only ferry service up and going. Everyone that's happened over the last 20 years has failed. But, new attitudes. And what about the new airline, New Leaf, already saying it's not going to be flying when they promised to?
Yeah.
If you're going to launch a new enterprise, as you said, WestJet canceling flights in Edmonton, Calgary, Fort McMurray, what would a newcomer have? What are their chances?
Unless they can keep the price down really low, that would be the only chance they'd have.
Hilliard, it's very interesting times that we're in. I hope people get through it okay.
I'm sure they will, but there's going to be some tough times, but that's sometimes it brings out the best in the human spirit.
And again, hopefully the governments will open their ears and minds to creative ideas instead of sticking to the old stodgy ones that we have seen don't work.
Exactly. I think they will. I'm optimistic about that. I think people are willing to consider new approaches.
Hilliard, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Nice talking to you, Jim.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBethGroup.com in Edmonton and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. You're listening to HowStreet.com Radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward comments about the show to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com Radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.